Biden is playing with fire with default, lies about the debt ceiling and spending cuts. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today, we're going to be talking about the national debt ceiling. Once again, it's at $31.4 trillion. And President Joe Biden is once again threatening default, but he's also misleading the American people about the fact that spending cuts have been tied to the debt ceiling before. He's saying that it hasn't. And I'm going to play a clip for you from President Joe Biden where he's talking about this. Bring up the volume and hit play.
And the idea is someone for the first time is saying, unless you pass this ridiculous budget I have, which is the way I would characterize what the Republican MAGA budget is, unless you pass this budget, we're not going to increase the debt limit and we're going to go bankrupt. The United States of America is going to renege for the first time in history on its debt. And you just can't, no one's ever tied them together before. I've said to the Republican leader, here's the deal. Take the debt limit, pass it like you did three times when Trump was president, and he increased the whole national debt for 200 years by 40%.
Well, Republicans would argue, and that though Donald Trump, at the very least, they would say, played ball. You're not willing to play ball.
Play ball. Play ball. What? He ballooned the debt. He created unemployment. Look, when I came to office, we had incredibly high unemployment. We're in a situation where we had very little movement on anything going on. And look at the employment rate now. Just today, 250,000 new jobs, highest participation in 75 years of women in the job market, lowest unemployment rate for African Americans. Things are moving.
As I said, you have a very strong economic recovery story. But this is a very volatile Congress. There are members of Congress that might be okay with us defaulting because they think it could hurt you more politically. Given that, are you prepared to invoke the 14th Amendment and blow through the debt ceiling?
I've not gotten there yet. And deal.
All right, we can stop right there with the Biden's clip here. He says that no one's ever tied these two things together before, the debt ceiling and spending cuts or changes to law. And that's just not true. If you actually look at the Budget Control Act of 2011 and also the 1996 Contract with America Advancement Act, you can see that this has actually not only been done before, this is kind of commonplace in recent memory. Let me share my screen here again. We'll go back to my piece here, but first we're going to look at the Budget Control Act of 2011. This was under House Speaker John Boehner. You will recall House Republicans had just gotten a majority in the House of Representatives in 2010. With the Tea Party and just people being upset about Obamacare and financial bailouts to banks and also spending too much money, the $1 trillion stimulus package. And so you have these runaway deficits under Barack Obama going forward, and House Republicans, John Boehner, the Tea Party, they come into power and they use the debt ceiling to enact the Budget Control Act. And this was a negotiated kind of compromise between Boehner and Obama at the time. And it's very clearly, it cut deficits pretty substantially. We'll look at that right here. This is the effect of the Budget Control Act of 2011 on the deficit. And it established discretionary spending caps that saved about $756 billion over out of the deficits. That was less borrowing. It also saved on mandatory spending another $20 billion because interest payments would be lower on the national debt because of all those spending cuts. It was going to save about $156 billion in less interest payments. There was also supposed to be some joint select committee on deficit reduction that was supposed to get another $1.2 trillion. But on the spending caps, it was about $917 billion of less money borrowed over 10 years from 2012 to 2021. So nearly $1 trillion in spending cuts. And there have been other changes to law that have been made over the years as a result of passing the debt ceiling. In 1996, the 104th Congress, back then, it was House Speaker Newt Gingrich and Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole and former President Bill Clinton, and they reached a compromise as well to raise the debt ceiling in a piece of legislation called the Contract with America Advancement Act of 1996. This had the Line Item Veto Act in it. It had the Congressional Review Act, which is a pretty substantial piece of legislation. It actually allows for Congress to disapprove of regulations after they've been put forward by the president and the executive branch departments and agencies. The Congressional Review Act is a law that was enacted by the U.S. Congress as Subtitle E of the Contract with America Advancement Act and signed into law by President Bill Clinton. The law empowers Congress to review, by means of an expedited legislative process, new federal regulations issued by Congress, government agencies, and by passage of a joint resolution to overrule the regulation. Well, this bill, the 1996 Contract with America Advancement Act, it also increased the debt ceiling, quote, to provide a permanent increase in the public debt. Back then it was like 5.5 trillion. Obviously it's 31.4 trillion now. So Biden is simply lying about, or maybe he forgot that this has been done before, but he should know about this. He was the lead negotiator for the White House under Barack Obama during the 2011 Budget Control Act. So let's just review and go through my piece here. Biden on debt ceiling and spending cuts. No one's ever tied them together before. Well, except in 2011 and 1996, Mr. President. And this was on MSNBC on May 6th. Biden was claiming that Congress has never increased the debt ceiling in exchange for budget, spending, and regulatory changes. There's only one problem. It's completely false. Just in recent history, both the Budget Control Act of 2011 and the Contract with America Advancement Act of 1996 resolved disagreements between Congress and the president over raising the national debt ceiling. Both bills made changes to law to restrain the growth of spending or to pass other regulatory reforms, particularly the Budget Control Act, the result of a compromise between Boehner and Obama, set discretionary budget limits into law, increased the debt limit, and even provided for the consideration of a balanced budget amendment. Title I was 10-year discretionary caps with sequester. Title II was vote on the balanced budget amendment. Title III was the debt ceiling disapproval process. Title IV was the establishment of the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction. And Title V was the Pell Grant and student loan program changes. Now, the legislation at the time, we just pulled up this screen earlier, the Budget Control Act had significant budget savings for the American taxpayers. $741 billion of discretionary spending caps, $20 billion of reductions to mandatory spending, and $156 billion as a result of less interest payments owed thanks to cutting spending. In describing the bill, which he signed, which increased the debt ceiling, then President Obama stated in 2012, January, here's the remarks by the president on the Defense Strategic Review, January 5th, 2012. He states, quote, "We have to renew our economic strength here at home, which is the foundation of our strength around the world. And that includes putting our fiscal house in order. To that end, the Budget Control Act passed by Congress last year with the support of Republicans and Democrats alike mandates reductions in federal spending." Well, the Budget Control Act, once again, this increased the national debt ceiling. It absolutely did. And so this was legislation that was tied together with the spending cuts. You can just go straight to Obama, and he's confirming that that's exactly what the bill does. You can look it up yourself. This is the Budget Control Act of 2011, and you will see that it included an increase in the debt ceiling as well as discretionary spending caps and other changes to law. And Biden should know he was the White House's lead negotiator on the Budget Control Act of 2011. Politicos Glenn Thrush, Monteraju, John Bresnahan, and Carrie Budoff Brown even wrote a glowing piece about it in August of 2011, Biden, McConnell, and the making of a deal. This is actually a very interesting history of the 2011 Budget Control Act's, final compromise between Obama and Boehner. And behind the scenes, Biden and McConnell are speaking with one another. Quote, the account of the final days of high stakes negotiations is based on interviews with lawmakers, congressional staff, administration aides, and Democratic officials familiar with the talks. They described an agreement sealed by Obama and Boehner, but said it was Biden's close working relationship with McConnell that broke the months-long logjam. So maybe Biden just doesn't remember that he was the lead negotiator. That was 12 years ago. But he obviously his staff should have prepped him on the true history of what happened here. And Biden was integral in the Budget Control Act, along with Mitch McConnell and John Boehner and Barack Obama. They were all agreeing with this because it had to pass the House, the Senate, and the White House. The Budget Control Act, which once again cut discretionary spending very significantly, $917 billion less borrowed, thanks to the Budget Control Act that House Republicans and the Tea Party were insisting on in exchange for increasing the debt ceiling. As for the Contract with America Advancement Act, that also increased the national debt ceiling and included the Congressional Review Act, the Line Item Veto Act. You remember that? It got overturned by the Supreme Court, unfortunately, because it was unconstitutional. It was adding additional powers. There's a veto process described in the Constitution. So the Supreme Court found that you need a constitutional amendment to do a line item veto. And so that would have to be what you'd have to do going forward. There was also the Senior Citizens Right to Work Act and the Small Business Growth and Fairness Act of 1996, which was also included in exchange for increasing the debt ceiling by then the Republican House and Senate. Both times these situations arose from a Republican takeover of the House and or the Senate following a Democratic president's first congressional midterm election. So just in recent memory, this is not the first time nor the second time, but this will be the third time this process has come up with Congress sitting down to negotiate with the White House on the terms and conditions for increasing the national debt ceiling, currently at $31.4 trillion. In both cases, in 2011 and 1996, the appearance of fiscal discipline actually seemed to help out the administration, both former President Bill Clinton and former President Barack Obama, who went on to both get reelected in 1996 and 2012, respectively, relatively easily. And so now we fast forward to 2023, HR 2811, the Limit Save Grow Act of 2023, which has already passed the House of Representatives. This is Kevin McCarthy, House Speaker. He's putting this forward with House Republicans. And this is going to be one of the most substantial pieces of deficit reduction and spending cuts, I think, that have ever been enacted by a Congress. And you can see here the Congressional Budget Office has already scored the HR 2811. It includes discretionary spending caps, this time of $3.2 trillion from 2023 to 2033. Student loan forgiveness program will be canceled. That's $460 billion. Energy tax provisions. These are the green energy subsidies. Those are going to go away. That'll be another $570 billion of spending cuts. Now they're going to get rid of those 87,000 IRS agents. So that's kind of like a tax cut. So the deficit will actually go up there because $120 billion less taxes will be collected. But then there's going to be work requirements on food stamps. That's another $120 billion saved. Rescissions of funds provided in 6 laws enacted from 2020 to 2022. This is leftover COVID spending and other stimulus spending. That's going to save $29 billion of cuts right there. Energy leasing and permitting provisions, that'll save $3.4 billion. And then there's less interest because we're making all of these spending cuts, about $4.3 trillion of spending cuts. There's also going to be an additional $550 billion less borrowed net interest owed on the national debt, totaling $4.8 trillion of spending cuts over the next 10 years. This bill will increase the debt ceiling, yes, and it will cut spending by $4.8 trillion, according to the Congressional Budget Office. This is very substantial savings, and it proves that Biden doesn't know what he's talking about. This has absolutely been done before. In previous Congresses, in the Budget Control Act of 2011 and the Contract with America Advancement Act of 1996. So I find this, the legislation being put forward by McCarthy and by House Republicans to be quite substantial. And so if you want to take action on that, I dropped the link in the chat. Tell Congress to pass the Limit, Save, Grow Act to prevent default. Joe Biden, by the way, in his budget, he's admitting that there's going to be $50 trillion of national debt by 2033. That's just on baseline spending. That's why we need to get spending under control, because otherwise we really are going to have a financial crisis, because who's going to buy all of those treasuries? Another $20 trillion of treasuries? I mean, the truth is the debt's probably going to be bigger than $50 trillion by 2033. It's been growing by more than 8% since 1980 on average every single year. And so if it keeps growing at that rate, it'll be more like $69 trillion. By 2037, it could be as high as $100 trillion. And that's just based on the average annual growth rate of the national debt, which is actually about 8.8% per year right now. It's more than 8%. So the HR 2811, that will definitely try to get this situation under control. We just went through all of the spending cuts. Now, Biden might prefer that these items be dealt with separately under regular order of the budget process, but that is not the hand he has been dealt. The House has already passed HR 2811, and 43 Senate Republicans have vowed to oppose the debt ceiling without spending cuts. Right here, 43 Senate Republicans vowed to oppose spending cuts. And I find this to be a very significant development. Senate Republicans are kind of locking arms, and they're standing with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and they're going to fight for these spending cuts that are in the Limit, Save, and Grow Act. I think that these cuts are definitely worth fighting for. So if you do get the opportunity, please send a message to both the House and the Senate. There may be some other version of this. So you want to send your message to both the Senate and the House. The Senate hasn't acted yet. But Senate Republicans seem to be doing their jobs right now and getting behind this legislation, meaning Biden doesn't have the votes in the Senate to overcome a filibuster in order to increase the debt ceiling. Even if he could, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has stated on April 26th, then the legislation would go to a conference committee as provided for under House and Senate rules in order to reconcile differences. Either way, the Limit, Save, Grow Act is the only game in town that is, besides other unconstitutional suggestions like President Biden somehow increasing the debt ceiling under the 14th Amendment, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned. This is from the National Archives, 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, Civil Rights, 1868. Now, this is mostly about equal protection of the law following the Civil War as applied by the states. But you want to look at the provision here on the validity of the public debt. Section 4, the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law. And then it goes on to say, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. So the applicable part here is the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law shall not be questioned. authorized by law. I find this to be the key part of this. Now, Biden, we played the interview with MSNBC. He says, oh, we haven't gotten there yet on the 14th Amendment. And this was followed up by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen on ABC's This Week. She states, we want to share our screen on this. You want to hear Janet Yellen talk about this? We could pull out of the screen for a second, present, share screen, Chrome tab. We want to do one-on-one. Actually, debt ceiling must be increased. Okay, we come back over to share screen. Here she is. Here's Janet Yellen. All right, I'm going to hit play here.
Look, our price.
Oh no, ads.
Feels good when you get it.
We're going to stop that for a second. Who wants to watch these stupid ads? Well, if you watch them on our videos, I actually don't mind so much. Okay, let's go back. We're going to present. We're going to share our screen. We're going to go to the tab. We're going to go to the debt ceiling here. Share. It's really high tech here.
Sure that Congress does its job. There is no way to protect our financial system and our economy other than Congress doing its job and raising the debt ceiling and enabling us to pay our bills. And we should not get to the point where we need to consider whether the president can go on issuing debt. This would be a constitutional crisis.
So there you go. It would be a constitutional crisis in order if Biden were to try to go ahead and stop, or try to raise the debt ceiling all by himself. Clearly, we don't want to go there because the Constitution doesn't provide for that. What would the outcome be? You could have the Supreme Court intervening, saying that the president didn't have the authority to raise the debt ceiling, and then you'd have a question about the Treasury debt that was issued in the time therein. This would probably rattle financial markets to their core. And so we'll go back to the piece here and finish out talking about increasing the debt ceiling and what the terms and conditions would be. Yellen is right. It would be a constitutional crisis because it's unconstitutional for the president to raise the debt ceiling by himself. The only public debt, quote, authorized by law is that presently subjected to the 31.4 trillion debt ceiling under current law. But if Biden is feeling lucky, well, perhaps he could try this newly minted theory of constitutional law out on the 6-3 Republican appointed majority on the Supreme Court, all the while bearing the consequences economically for refusing to negotiate with Congress when that is the situation with every piece of legislation that comes up. The president always has to negotiate with Congress. And if he doesn't like a law, he can veto a law and say, oh, I prefer it be this way. So if he wants to veto a debt ceiling bill when he's saying that you need to raise this by June 1 or we're going to default, well, that's kind of on him too. Why wouldn't he sit down to negotiate just like he did in 2011 with the Budget Control Act? He was talking with Mitch McConnell. We can kind of go through this a little bit. I think this is a very interesting history. And we went over this part. They described in an agreement that actually was based on Biden's close working relationship with McConnell that broke a months-long logjam. McConnell and Biden have a long history serving together for a full 25 years. Again, this was in 2011. Of Biden's 36-year tenure as the Democratic senator from Delaware, the two men were at the center of a major tax cut deal in December. Last Wednesday, Biden and McConnell quietly presented Boehner with a spending cuts only package, which Boehner promptly rejected. McConnell, both a consummate GOP loyalist and old school deal maker, then held off Biden for several days before restarting the back channel talks. He was waiting for Boehner to pass his own debt limit bill, a measure the speaker needed to shore up his leadership of the House, but a bill Obama had already promised to veto. Shortly after lunch on Saturday, McConnell picked up the phone and called Biden to announce he was ready to deal. The two had never really been out of contact, checking in with each other, even as Obama stepped back from direct negotiations with Republicans and the House GOP feuded openly. This time, the stakes were higher, and Boehner delegated McConnell as his agent in the hopes of streamlining negotiations as the cable networks fired up their doomsday debt clocks. McConnell wanted to negotiate primarily with Biden, concerned that other Democrats, especially Obama, would prove to be less trustworthy bargaining partners. Here's a quote. Biden's the only guy with real negotiating authority, and McConnell knows that his word is good, said a senior GOP staffer close to the talks. He was key to the deal. Get that? He was key to the deal. Biden was the only guy that they could talk to that would seem to would deal in good faith with McConnell. The president assigned White House Legislative Affairs Director Rob Neighbors to work with Biden, but it was Biden who was tasked with discussing the granular details with McConnell during 4 phone conversations, narrowing differences over the all-important trigger to be activated if a bipartisan congressional committee can't come up with $1.2 trillion more in cuts in November. Progress was made, but the atmosphere was tense as the hours slipped toward the deadline. By Saturday night, discussions over the trigger had bogged down, and a call between McConnell staff and senior White House aides turned heated when the GOP negotiators demanded that Medicaid be added to the mix of programs that could face cuts. Gene Sperling, chairman of Obama's Economic Council, was in mid-sentence trying to calmly explain why the White House wouldn't do that when OMB director Jack Lew interrupted. No, the typically mild-mannered Lew yelled. The answer is simply no, no, no. The trigger fight dragged on as Obama and aides milled in and out of the spacious West Wing corner office of Bill Daley, Obama's chief of staff. Daley played a central role in organizing administration activity. That role diminished as Biden's grew. He also sparred with Boehner's chief of staff, Barry Jackson, over the speaker's refusal to return Obama's calls for 5 hours a week earlier. Daley was pissed at Boehner, and they returned the favor, a congressional Democrat said. McConnell's intervention served a dual purpose. He wanted to avoid an economic disaster that would shatter the economy and possibly his shot at becoming majority leader in 2013 or 2015, as the case turned out to be. But he was also intent on protecting Boehner, who had been weakened by Tea Party revolts within his own ranks. This is Politico, guys, so kind of grain of salt here, and sought to minimize any daylight between more moderate GOP senators and firebrand House conservatives. Throughout the day Saturday, the GOP's odd couple, the fastidious and tight-lipped minority leader and the gregarious chain-smoking Boehner, held a negotiation within a negotiation as Biden pressed for concessions. Biden would make a proposal. McConnell would pad the narrow, red-carpeted hallway between the rotunda that linked his office to Boehner's, staffer said. The speaker made the return trip several times himself, standing in shirt sleeves and puffing smoke as McConnell, a non-smoker, listened intently in the impeccable suit. Some aides suspect he wears 24 hours a day. Early in the indirect 3-way talks, McConnell and Boehner made a critical concession. They ditched a demand for a 6-month extension of the debt ceiling and acceded to Obama's demand that any agreement last through the end of 2012. But McConnell was enormously sensitive to the perception he was being rolled or straying from Boehner. So when Chuck Schumer went on MSNBC last Wednesday and praised McConnell for proposing a way out of the crisis, McConnell approached Harry Reid and barked, "Tell your henchmen to stop saying nice things about me." Quote, "It hurts me." So McConnell didn't like being praised by Harry Reid. See, I told you this history of the 2011 Budget Control Act is absolutely fascinating. On Saturday afternoon, Reid and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi met Obama in the Oval Office, only to hear that Republicans hadn't budged on the trigger. But on Sunday, an agreement on the trigger had been struck at the staff level. Obama's final selling job was to his fellow Democrats, and here too, Biden pitched in, according to Democratic aides. So you had Pelosi, Reid, Schumer, Steny Hoyer, Dick Durbin, and others gathered around a table in Pelosi's office to review the details of the deal. The mood was grim, even testy. Biden's argument was ultimately convincing, however. The trigger contained in the compromise would rely heavily on automatic cuts to defense programs, anathema to GOP negotiators that might motivate them to consider closing corporate tax loopholes. Quote, "The defense cuts sold them." basically 800 to 900 billion of the 2.1 trillion is in defense or security cuts. A Democratic aide told Politico. Biden kept saying, again, Biden's at central to this whole story of 2011. And then when all things were factored in, it was basically a 50-50 on defense and domestic spending cuts. GOP staffers were burnt out after months of fruitless meetings at the White House that they had taken to calling them joke meetings. Worse still, Professor Obama's lectures. Fascinating. Moreover, McConnell's support helped Boehner present the deal as having unified GOP support, key to preserving the party's leverage in future negotiations with the White House. To Boehner, the wrangling over a final deal proved far less dramatic than the narrow vote for his own debt limit bill, a 218 to 2010 victory over Democrats and Tea Party stalwarts. Boehner and his whip, Kevin McCarthy, had confronted their moment of truth the previous Wednesday when they faced off about 24 Tea Party conservatives and freshmen who flatly rejected Boehner's attempt to sell them his version of a balanced budget amendment. At that moment, the leaders and their aides abruptly rose and stomped out of the room to pleas of, "Where are you going?" from the stunned members. "We've heard enough," the staffers replied. Boehner canceled the vote and tweaked the measure to attract some more holdouts. A leadership aide close to the talk said, quote, "There was nothing these far-right guys would say yes to. It became clear that they were going to be intransigent no matter what. So eventually this thing is going to pass, and it doesn't get done without Joe Biden being the chief negotiator on this legislation. So I find that kind of hilarious that he's trying to tell the American people that this has never been linked before. There have never been spending cuts. And, the debt ceiling being increased in the same piece of legislation or other changes to law alongside the debt ceiling, except in the Budget Control Act of 2011, the 1996 Contract with America Advancement Act. So all things being told, I thought that the 2011 Budget Control Act, the wrangling between the House and the Senate and the White House, notwithstanding, was a pretty darn good piece of legislation. It really did have substantial spending cuts that were attached to it. Was it everything House Republicans had been fighting for? Of course not. You have only one of the elected branches, so they eventually had to come to a compromise with the Senate, which was led by Democrats at the time, and the White House, which again was led by Obama. And I think pretty much the same thing is going on here with HR 2811, the Limit, Save, Grow Act. Again, if you haven't contacted your members of Congress, again, the link's in the chat. Tell Congress to pass the Limit, Save, Grow Act to prevent default. And yeah, that's what they need to do. They need to pass this. There's no reason to, not to address the fiscal problems that we're having right now. The national debt's going to be 50 trillion, maybe $69 trillion by 2033. Biden, again, might prefer an alternative to this process, but so far he hasn't really articulated one. Either way, this is the process that has been used historically in cases of mixed government, where neither party controls the House and the Senate and the White House, including 2011 and 1996, and has in fact resulted in bipartisan compromises that both increase the debt ceiling, reduce deficits, and make other changes to law. So they've always been tied together, Mr. President. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day. But first, we're going to go to the chat and see what you guys are saying. See if you're fascinated, as I am, by Politico's history of the debt ceiling. Let's see what's going on. Oh, lots of people in the chat. You're all fired up here. That's good to see. All right. Let's see. William Garrison. Yep, they've gone over the top. Let's see. Dominic Gomes. Biden's a lying POS. Dominic Gomes. F the scumbag. Faye Conklin. President Biden needs to go. Thank you for your comment. Marie Lane. Sorry, guys. I can't read them all. Carol Urbanek, liar POS. Maria Williams, liar. Rosa Hawkins, lies. Maria Williams, BS. Zip Zimmerman, FJB. What's that mean? Maria Lane, he is a joke. Barbara Galoy, big liar. Michelle Yoder Schaefer, lying Biden. I think you guys agree with me. Eddie Griffin, liar, 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 MF liar. Let's see. Sindra Williams, Joe Biden is not my president. Well, we only get one president at a time. Sorry, guys. Let's see here. Wayne Morris, Biden is a lying POS. Lorianne Wilkes, liar. Bobber Painter, Biden has overspent and now he wants to blame the GOP. He is lying and so evil. He planned to destroy America with Obama. Thank you for your comment. Michael Luzuski, how you doing, man? I just watched his press release filled with nothing but lies and accusations blaming Republicans. All Republicans want are for Democrats to remove all this BS, phony companies, and propose bills to fund frivolous spending hidden in thousands of pages to steal from America. I agree with you. They're wasting so much money up there on Capitol Hill and at the Treasury. That's why, and in fact, most of, about 2/3 of the spending is on autopilot right now, so-called mandatory spending. Interestingly enough, the new Limit Save Grow Act really doesn't touch mandatory spending too much. It definitely doesn't touch Social Security, Medicare spending. And so that's, I think, making promises to seniors. Those are going to continue to be met. Betsy Burns, hey, hello from YouTube. Biden makes me sick with his lies. Don't see how some people believe him. I agree with you, Betsy. I mean, either Biden forgot that he was the lead negotiator in 2011, or he's lying. You can choose. I think he is lying. I don't really question his memory in this case. I mean, it's hard to forget something like that. John Wesolowski Jr. I can't believe people believe any of this. I don't know if anyone's falling for it. So people just kind of play along with it. But are they falling for it? I don't know. That's a difference. Violet Gabrielson Covillian, fairy tales, and then pukey emoticons. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of a fantasy that we deal with. We deal with fantasies all the time here. We're outside the Beltway, so we don't want to be inside the Beltway, but there's a lot of fairy tales over there. So here we're going to try to tell it to you straight, like we see it here. Scott Shoup, let's go Brandon. What's that mean? Let's see. Cheryl Cook, Biden is clueless, dumb, and a liar. What a waste of oxygen. Gwyneth Smith, and this idiot is president. Our country is in a world of trouble if we don't get rid of him. Dante Perez, FJB, the biggest moron in the world. Impeach, Sue First, impeach 46th. We're not even up to 45 yet. All right. Let's see here. Doug Willis, and people will believe anything this absolute idiot says. Trump 2024, bunch of American flags there. Sue First, impeach, ASAP. Dante Perez thinks there's trees in the mist here. Let's see. Lynn Pierce, the whole administration needs to go. His handlers, he is such a liar, just like Satan, his father. My goodness, that's not very nice. Let's see here. Michael Luzuski. I don't know. Did an executive order. I don't know about this. I'm not gonna say that's wrong, Michael Luzuski, but I don't know what that's about. So I'm just gonna move on here. Dante Perez, Biden v. Biden. Marie Gibbs, impeachment is way too good for him. I say jail him. Actually, under you have a unitary executive, Article 2. It would be unconstitutional if the Justice Department were to attempt to prosecute a sitting president. This has come up from time to time during both Republican and Democratic administrations. Democrats had fantasies that the FBI was going to go to the White House and arrest President Trump, but they couldn't because it was unconstitutional. The Justice Department, you only get one executive at a time, and it can't kind of act against itself in that manner. So that is another fantasy, maybe outside the Beltway. Frank Robbins, if they would quit giving all our tax dollars away, we would have all the money that Americans need. Wants a balanced budget. I agree with that. Telford Burkabill, all Joe Biden and his administration do is lie, and then lie some more. Impeachment is the only way to stop all of this lying to the American people. You could, the House could impeach them if they have the votes, a majority. That's all it would take. But you probably don't got the votes in the Senate. It takes 2/3 of the Senate to remove a president. It's never happened before. Michael Lizewski, I bet they got those trillions of dollars in there to find Nancy Pelosi's park in California because she stole that money the first time. Michael Lizewski. And everybody wonders how politicians get rich. Expose all that. We'll do let's do a piece on insider trading or just other kinds of stock deals that members of Congress are engaged in. I bet you a lot of members of both parties are doing it. Marcus Mean, give me a wow. I can't believe what's going on in this stream face. Okay. Earl Lombardo, nothing new there. Biden has been who he is for the last 50 years. Democrats just reinvented his image, and the flakes bought hook, line, and sinker. Robert Bundy, the debt ceiling should stay where it's at, and Biden needs to be thrown out of office along with his administration. You could leave it there, but they will run out of money to pay obligations. And so it's a question of what are they obligated to pay under the law? Probably the net interest owed on the debt. And so would revenues be enough to satisfy the interest owed on the debt? Yes, it would for the time being. But what would probably start happening if you hit the debt ceiling without increasing it and you were exhausted all your extraordinary measures is interest rates would start rising. And so eventually, if they got really, really high, you wouldn't have enough revenue to actually pay the interest. So raising the debt ceiling is probably a good idea until you figure out a way to balance the budget. Michael Lizewski, it kind of seems like Democrats are doubling down on what Trump stopped them from doing because it got in the way of the money investment they had before Trump. Also, on the question of hitting the debt ceiling, if you hit the debt ceiling, it's like, oh, why increase the debt ceiling? Well, for starters, you can use it as leverage to cut spending, as was done in 1996 and in 2011. So this is actually one of those must-pass pieces of legislation. And again, if you hit the debt ceiling, you just don't want to do anything. Interest rates could really go sky high. A similar situation actually arose in Greece, Spain, and Italy when the ECB was basically imposing a debt ceiling on them, saying, we're not going to lend you any more money. We're not going to finance your debt or allow for the financing of your debt unless you do some spending cuts. And as a result, interest rates went really, really high. And people were questioning whether Greece, Spain, and Italy were going to default back then. Let's see. Robert Bundy. Biden is the reason we are in this shape, and Obama and Soros should go to prison, and Hillary while they're at it. Lock them all up, he says. Tom Davis. Don't put voters in any more debt. Well, again, until they figure out a way to balance the budget, the Limit, Save, Grow Act, again, will save about $4.8 trillion, but that's over a period of about 10 years. We've got a massive budget deficit of well more than $1 trillion. So even saving on average $480 billion a year won't balance the budget. So I'm afraid we are going to go into more debt, even if House Republicans pass their legislation. Phil Murphy, another of his lies, responding to Biden. Everyone's upset at Biden. I wonder why. Michael Lynn, amen. Joe Biden and his whole administration immediately need to be removed and prosecuted. Enough is enough. Robert Bundy, when will they ever get it that if they put people back to work in this country, it would solve a lot of problems they have now, break ties with China too. I agree with that. And if people have more children, we've talked about this before, fertility probably needs to be much, much higher, because one of the impacts of birth control and going from about 3.6 babies per woman back in 1960 all the way down to about 1.6 babies per woman today. That's as of 2020, just declining fertility, birth control. It stayed under 2 babies per woman all the way until about the 1980s, the late 1980s, when you had the Reagan boom. And then you had the so-called Great Moderation, and it stayed above that 2 babies per woman all the way until the financial crisis. And then when the economy started tanking again, then we were right back in the soup on fertility because people postpone marriage. They don't purchase houses as much. They postpone, they're going to postpone child rearing as a result of postponing the marriage and the home purchases. The same thing happened in 2020. It went down even further when the economy tanked. And again, weddings were postponed. People didn't want to purchase homes. They're putting off child rearing. We'll see what the 2021 number shows, but until you get more people you're going to have fewer taxpayers as a percentage of retirees because there's just more baby boomers, retiring, and that's going to eat our obligations going forward. So if you want to pay Social Security and Medicare, spending's going to increase automatically every single year. Let's see, Betsy Burns. I thought the House already passed McCarthy's bill, and we just need senators to pass it. That's true, but just like the Senate Republicans can block a bill from coming to the floor, Chuck Schumer controls the floor. He decides what bills come to the Senate floor. So there's probably going to be some sort of compromise prior to something coming to the floor. I suppose they could bring up the Limit, Save, Grow Act. Maybe they'll try that for some posturing on the Democratic side and say, see, you don't have the votes to pass Limit, Save, Grow. We need to go back to the negotiating table, which is the same thing. They need to keep talking until they come to an agreement, just like in 2011. Jeff Gilbert, thank you for those emojis, cons there. Robert Bunny, stop changing the Constitution. It was fine like it was. Well, I mean, it is what it is right now. You pass a constitutional amendment. They're all still there. You can repeal a constitutional amendment. Prohibition got repealed. Betsy Burns, one of my senators, has said he will sign it. And I have already said, well, he'll vote for it. And I've already called my other senator and told him to sign it. You mean vote for it? You want them to vote for it. The president will sign it. I'm confident in the end. Betsy Burns, Yellen is another person that needs to go. She probably represents the Biden administration pretty well, though. Let's see here. Not to say that that's a good thing. I'm just saying that, she probably articulates the Biden administration position on Treasury matters, financial matters, banking issues. Probably pretty good. Let's see here. Michael Lazewski, hiring illegals only takes them away from America because they send their money back to their country. Why is Biden telling them to come to America? He's flooding the zone. If you don't protect the border, people are going to charge the border. You have hundreds of thousands of people crossing into America. Former President Trump actually was getting that under control. He was finishing the wall when 2020 ended. It wasn't quite done yet. And Biden, actually, there was sections of wall that could have been finished. And Biden just said, nah, we're not doing that. And so maybe that'll be a part of this negotiation as well, or the omnibus bill that comes up at the end of the year, or the CR, continuing the resolution that's due in September. Let's see what else is here. Florida girl, hey, how you doing? The same Congress that has given money to Ukraine has overspent, over budgeted. That one, yeah, we need them to act on this. Robert Bundy, the Democrats are like kids in a candy store. Money, money, money is all they know. Here's one for you. How about saving money? There's a good idea. I agree with that, Robert. Let's see. Betsy Burns, McConnell is a traitor. Yeah, but they're holding together right now, the Senate Republicans right now. And so right now, McConnell's doing his job. If he gets it wrong, if he surrenders, we'll let you know and say McConnell is doing a bad job. Let's see. Michael Lazewski. Y'all see if the Democrats don't want to cut Medicare and Social Security and blaming them or Republicans, it's right there on paper. Yeah, the Limit, Save, Grow Act has nothing to do with Social Security and Medicare. The Republicans actually found spending cuts totaling $4.8 trillion elsewhere in the budget. So it has nothing to do with grandma and grandpa. Let's see. Robert Pullham. Biden already vowed to veto everything that comes from the right wing. Okay. Robert Bundy. Biden, Obama, then dealing with China is the beginning, is where this all started. When you dance with the devil, you pay. Michael Lazewski. Biden said so himself, that has been dealing with China his entire career with policies created against America and investing in China. I'm not saying he's opposed to trade with China, but one thing he hasn't done is get rid of most of the tariffs that former President Trump put in place on China. So on trade policy, Biden is watching kind of his trade flank in the Rust Belt states in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio. He realizes that if he goes too strongly against Trump's anti-China policies, really they were just pro-America policies that were going to tell China, hey, you're manipulating your currency. You can ship goods here, but you're not going to make them dirt cheap. We're going to charge tariffs on those goods so that American companies can compete with you. Let's see here, getting to the bottom of the chat. Let's see. Debbie Simmons always lies. Let's see here. Robert Bundy, I wouldn't want Biden to handle my private budget. Get these circus people out of office before we end up beside the Titanic. My goodness. Michael Lazuski, tell Biden hell is fueled by oil. He best start drilling again to put it out. You might want water for that, but I still think we should drill for oil. Let's see here. Tom Lamar, thank you for your comment. We need debt-free money now, like Ben and Abe printed. As you realize, the private banks of the Fed have counterfeited all our money since 1913, as you know, question mark. Most of the national debt is false and unconstitutional. Congress can issue the currency. They can coin money under the Constitution. The way that's been interpreted is that could include fiat currency. I realize that there are those who disagree with that interpretation, but that's kind of the standing law right now. So we gotta kind of deal with the rules as they are, not as we wish them they were. I mean, we could just argue philosophically about the way things ought to be, but we're going to be pragmatic and try to tell you what is going on, provide some facts about the situation that is the current interpretation of the law. You could disagree with that. You could say, no, it should only be coin money. There has to be a gold standard or a silver standard. And until the Supreme Court or federal courts are going to overturn those precedents, I think that you would probably need a constitutional amendment to revert to that. Just under what we've got here, almost to the bottom here. Richard Acuff, Biden thinks he's Santa Claus. Can have your cake and eat pie. Finally, Jerry Blum, impeach him already. All right. Well, once again, Joe Biden, he's got it wrong. 2011 Budget Control Act and the 1996 Contract with America Advancement Act. They both made changes to federal law. They cut spending by hundreds of billions of dollars. The Limit Save Grow Act of 2023, that's going to save about $4.8 trillion. So it's standard operating procedure for Congress, particularly Republican Congresses, to try to deal with a Democratic president, in this case, Joe Biden, but Barack Obama and Bill Clinton before him, to try to get a deal on the debt ceiling that both increases the debt ceiling and cuts spending. Biden is lying. I don't think he's forgotten that he was the lead negotiator on the Budget Control Act of 2011. And with that, I'm signing off here. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. One more comment. Michael Childs, why are we running up the clock when we know he's been installed? Hit the bell for notifications and have a good day.